Alright, so I'm just gonna kick this thing off and we're gonna talk. So I hope you got some time set aside because this ain't gonna be a short one, I can already tell. So I try to get a few knives from a maker before making a video. Gives me a sense of that maker's, what that maker's good at, where they fall short, and most of all, just their consistency in general. Like, how good is their work on average? I don't just talk about the knife that's in front of me because chances are you're not getting this exact knife. This is a custom, and you don't know how consistent a maker is until you get a few pieces from them. You might get a good knife from a bad maker, you might get a bad knife from a good maker. You can't really tell what's what when you only have a sample size of one. So trust me, all of this is going to be relevant soon. So what I got here is the Pohan Leu Negligence. And this is a maker I got some history with. It's kind of a long story, but I might as well just start it from the beginning. So we're talking about a few years back at this point. So the bluefin was my first glue. It was a lot like this one, just a lot thinner, and had some terrible jimping up here on the thumb ramp area. Almost felt like you were impaling your finger on that jimping. Anyways, ergonomics weren't great, had up and down blade play, but what really killed it for me was actually the flipper on it. One of the worst flippers I've had on any knife. The thing had very sharp corners, and paired that up with a hard finger-breaking detent, and you had a recipe for pain. I couldn't flip it twice in a row without hurting myself, and it wasn't a one-off issue either. It was a case for two different bluefins that I tried. So then I just kind of decided that maybe flippers are Pohan Leu's problem, so I searched out and found like a non-flipper thumb stud bluefin to avoid the issue altogether. Still had all the same ergonomic problems, but at least I could open the thing without pain. That one was decent, but didn't end up keeping it. Next model was the Hamachi. I really disliked this one. It was everything I hated in a Quaken folder with all the same issues that the bluefins had added on top for good measure. I'm talking about the same unusable flipper, and the thing had blade play as well, and it was blocky. I'm not talking about like Strider Lego SNG blocky. This thing felt like it was a square broomstick in hand. The guy hardly did a thing to it. Hardly any chamfers, it just felt bad. Owned one, handled another, both were equally as terrible. And at this point, I'm just ready to give up. I'm 5 knives in, I still haven't found anything really worthwhile. And at the same time, his price has shot up by a crazy amount for some reason. Like, going from the bluefins to Hamachis, it went from about, I think, like 600 to 1,000 and up. So then he comes out with his newest model. It's the Negligence, and I was really liking what I was seeing at the time. So I decided to give Leu another shot. The first Negligence I had, though, it was a disaster. I do need to say, though, that was probably the only Pohan Leu that didn't have blade play. Problem is, the lockup was so solid that I literally had to pry the damn thing open with a quarter to open it. It had some of the worst lock stick I've experienced. I've broken in more than a few of those older Medfords. Difference is, the Medfords break in. That Negligence, it never got better. I don't mind lock stick. I've said that more than a few times now. Some people treat lock stick like it's lead in their drinking water or something like that. Like, any is too much for them. Me, I like to think they're being unreasonable, but you know what? I always say I don't mind lock stick as long as I can still open the knife one-handed. I don't know if I could have opened that first one if I had another set of hands helping me. I guess with Pohan Leu, if you have blade play, you got one of the good ones. At least you can close a knife that has a lock rock. But the thing that really got me, though, is it didn't feel like he learned much. The design was better, but a lot of the same complaints that I leveled before, they were still valid. Flipper was almost the exact same mess as his older models. Sharp-pointed flipper combined with a hard detent, centering was off, and the blade actually arrived dull. And know this, Pohan Leu is a maker that's actually known for his sharp, scandy ground blades. He's known for that sharp edge. That Negligence, it felt like it really lived up to its name, because it even had a noticeable wave in the grind. It was right here, he basically slipped on the grinder. He ground one part of the blade more, so it was, so it kind of had like a wave like this. He still sent it out the door. It didn't feel like he cared. I don't know why I tried for that 6th time, because it didn't feel like he did. And you know, people say insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different results. Who knows? Maybe I'm just crazy. But, so, I'm telling all of you guys this just to kind of frame this review. And after telling you this, you might be wondering why I have another Leu on the table right now. Believe it or not, I bought this one from a friend of mine. This is my knife. It might not stay my knife, but it is right now. I got it for a pretty good price, and I got it for a channel. I even did some research, and I found out that this one was sold around the same time as that first one from the same dealer too. so it's likely from the same run. So I'm fully expecting to just trash this one on camera. But I'm going to tell you right now, it ended up surprising me. It's not terrible. As much as I just want to tear a Pohan Leu to shreds on camera, that's not the point of his channel. I started this thing to honestly review knives. I tells it like I sees it, and I have to honestly say this is probably the best Pohan Leu I've had. Granted, the bar was set so low that it was just an inch off the ground, but all this said, it's alright. It's nowhere near perfect, but at least I'm seeing something here. And let's just start up here. So this is the first Pohan Leu flipper that I can really call usable. It's another stupid pointed flipper, but it is rounded just enough at the very point right here to kind of give you enough for your finger to not hurt when you flip it. But then that first Negligence kind of had the same flipper too. But what makes this one different? And the saving grace on this entire knife is actually the lighter detent. If it had the same hard detent I've come to expect from the guy, I would have no problem calling this thing junk. Because pairing up a pointed flipper with a very hard detent, it's a war crime. And that was how he made all his other flippers. You can have one or the other, not both. Why would you put a sharp pointed corner on the area where you need to apply force with your fingertip? It makes about as much sense as punching the corner of a table to move it. But yeah, 2 flips in, your finger turns red. Well, this one right here, detent's set about right where it should be. I'm able to flip this thing with no problems, no serious issues. You can even push button it, but it'll wear you down a little bit faster. Still a good way to open it though. And the thing is, you're not really losing much with this lighter detent right here. I have no idea why I did things that way before. This thing opens up just fine. I actually call it very reliable too. It's on bearings, decently smooth. Not drop shut smooth, but it's nicely smooth after a break-in. If he really is dead set on making his flippers this sharp, then this is how his detents should be done. So I guess good work there. So my complaints with the flipper actually start when it's open. First up, I'm going to put it down right here, and we're going to take a step back. Doesn't the thing just kind of look terribly out of place? Like, this is a knife right here with some really clean lines, and that flipper is just kind of jutting out here out of nowhere. Like, what line is this thing supposed to follow? Maybe you don't care about that, but it also feels as out of place as it looks. I get this in hand, and I think, why is this flipper intruding in on my finger choil? It feels alright when you're holding it and cutting paper or doing something like that, but do any kind of real cutting where you're actually putting force behind it, and you feel that flipper digging into you. Because if your grip involves having this flipper against your index at all, you'll feel it. Because this thing isn't really all that rounded. It's rounded on the corners here, but only very slightly. On the edges right here, it feels kind of sharp. So anytime you brush up against it, you will feel it. It feels rough, it feels unfinished. It's not enough to make the entire knife uncomfortable, but I do find myself adjusting my grip to find ways around it. It's a shame too, because the ergonomics on this one, they're actually really good. The handle was well shaped by any standard. It's really only well built for a saber grip, but that's fine with me. I use it all the time. Locks your hand in with this finger choil right here, and it feels like it fits my hand exactly. It's thick and overbuilt, but it has the right kind of thickness. It's not overly thick where it feels like you have a break in your hand, but it's not so smooth that it'll actually twist and turn in your hand. So it's slab-sided, everything's chamfered on the frame pretty well. So you can even choke up over here, so there's actually no dead space on this knife. This part right here is pretty well shaped to accommodate your finger. Your middle finger just kind of lands comfortably over here, the rest of your fingers fall in line. The edge actually doesn't start until right about over here, where my nail is. So you actually have some space to stretch out over here. The problem is though, I wouldn't really recommend using this grip, because the edges on the blade here, they feel just as unfinished, if not more unfinished than the flipper. This is a grip that's very good on paper, but it's uncomfortable for hard cutting, and it's annoying even for light work. These right here, they all feel like straight 90-degree edges. And between that and the sharp sides on the flipper, it honestly feels lazy. Like you didn't bother finishing the blade. And lazy is not a word I want to use to describe my $1,000 custom. This shows a lack of attention to detail, and I think it just hurts the knife altogether. It's not even that hard to fix, you just need to kind of round off the corners over here. In terms of just pure cutting performance though, this blade is actually very good. Blade on this one is in CPM S35VN, and I do like it when makers go above those CPM 154 range steels. I have too many of those floating around on the custom knife market. I like my variety. And the thing is, it's done in Leu's signature style. On most knives, you get some flat, but then most of it's actually ground. This one's the exact opposite. Pohan Leu is known for his Scandi ground blades. So the entire blade is actually full thickness up until here, and then he zero grinds it to make the edge, meaning there's no secondary bevel. And unlike that first Negligence I had, this thing is scary sharp. It has that edge that he's known for. Also, doing the blade this way, it gives the thing a very striking look. I think it's perfect for this design. Like everything from the blade shape to a grind right here, it just kind of pulls the entire thing together. Like there's very clean lines, and I just really like this blade. Like it's actually tapered over here, so it's slightly wider here, and then it just kind of slightly thins out to here, and then it terminates in that Japanese Tonto edge. Also, no sharpening choil here to break things up. Some people like them, but for me, there's nothing I hate more than going to cut something and having that material get caught in a sharpening choil. It won't happen here. Start to cut even over here where it's completely dull, and it'll smoothly slide down to the edge. I really like it when makers design knives that don't need a sharpening notch. And I'll give it to Leu here. This is a great design overall. Even finishes things off with a handwritten maker's mark right here. And he does this thing where he underlines the Leu if it's the first knife in this model to be done in this combination of materials. If you know about it, it's a nice little touch. Kind of adds something to it. One thing I do need to mention though about the blade, and I don't know if it's going to translate well on camera, but the entire grind here is actually off center. Flip it back and forth. I don't think it comes across on camera, but you can notice that this side is noticeably a little bit taller than the other one. You can kind of see it a lot better over here at the tip, where you can kind of see it's off center. This blade is actually perfectly centered in the frame. Just the grind makes it look off right there. So yeah, I'm not exactly a huge fan of it. It's sometimes what you get in a hand ground blade, and it's not really a functional issue. I mean, you wouldn't even notice this in use, but I don't know. It just kind of feels a bit off for me to have the entire grind be off. But you know what? It's probably at the upper limit of what I'll tolerate for a hand ground blade, so I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, moving on to lockup. There's blade play on this one. Don't know if you can hear that right there. That's lock rock. So like I was saying before, it just means I got one of the good ones. At least I can close this one with no problems. Anyway, seriously though, I do have to say it's probably the best lockup I've had on Pohan Leu. It's the least blade play I've had, and if you have the knife in hand, you naturally push that lock bar over in your grip. So it makes it lock up tight. So when you're using it, it's actually rock solid. It won't stay pushed over, it'll just kind of go right back, and you'll get the blade play again once your finger gets off of it. But you know what? Baby steps here. Definitely a hit against the knife, but I think it could have been much worse. I do have to say though, it's at least a very safe lockup. I was never really on board with the idea of super early lockup. This thing's at a very safe 30%. I can tap the spine pretty hard too, and just no issues. When I go to unlock it, you'll see the detent actually hits very early right here, about right over here. So it goes from here to here. So the detent ball is basically never going to be in your way. You don't need to worry about it hanging up. If you go to unlock it, it's just going to be right there. And moving on to the lock bar, I really like what he did with the lock bar right here. He did this one right. It's completely even with the other side, so you don't get a hot spot here at all. You can see that he put a noticeably wider chamfer on the inside right here. It's different, it's slightly wider than any other chamfer on the knife. So you know that he did this one on purpose. You kind of see how it widens up by the time it reaches this point right here. And it gives you a place for your thumb to just kind of rest right here. And you kind of push up against that part where it's just kind of basically flattened. And you can close the knife with no problems. So moving back to the handle, you see it has a bolster and a scale on the front. The bolster is zirconium and the scale is Thunderstorm Kevlar. It's a nice classy material combo if you ask me. The Zerk is alright. It's been given a very deep, let me close the blade so I get a bit more space. Yeah, it's been given a pretty heavy orange peel finish on it. And you can kind of see it right there. Yeah, so the Zerk is alright. For the Thunderstorm Kevlar, I'm not exactly a huge fan of it. So I think this one could have been done better. You just don't see very many of those wires showing on the surface, and that's a shame too, because those shimmering wires that you see when you kind of finish it, it's the reason you go for Thunderstorm Kevlar over just normal micarta. Like, I can pass light over it right now, you just really don't see too many of them. And in person, I can't get it to show on camera, but you actually see a good number of voids in person. Functionally though, I do have to say it's pretty well done. If you don't know, Thunderstorm Kevlar has copper wires weaved through it, kind of like lightning strike carbon fiber. The stuff is a nightmare to work with. It'll feel like a cactus in hand if it isn't done right. This one's actually, so it's actually a pretty decent achievement when you get a knife in this material that doesn't constantly stab your hand. So on this one, Lou got the comfort part down, like he did the material good enough. He used the material good enough to where it won't constantly stab you, but I don't think he gets the most out of it visually. Moving on though, you can see the hardware on this one is blue anodized. I'm not sure if that really goes with the material combo here. I think I would have just preferred like maybe clean satin hardware or something like that. But you know what, that's preference. So on the back right here, you can see that it has a black backspacer. That's actually carbon fiber, it's not G10. It kind of looks like it from far away, but if you look close enough, you can kind of see some of the fibers right there. It's a small thing, but I do notice it. You could easily cheap out here because it honestly doesn't matter. You're not really going to be paying that much attention to it. But I kind of like that they actually took that extra step and actually went with an upgraded material. Another thing that I really appreciate is how it wraps around the point of the blade right here. So I don't see a way where I can snag this tip on anything. I don't have to worry about like it being in the pocket and my clothes rubbing up on top of the blade. Like, I don't have to worry about like fabric getting inside, snagging the edge or anything like that. I actually wish that more makers would do something like this. So very well done here. It all comes back to what I was saying about this being a very good design. Moving on to the lock side though, it's just kind of boring. There's not much to really say about it. Just dark wash titanium, and something you'll notice is that the frame screws right here actually go straight into the frame. So I'm sure some people will complain about that, but I've honestly never understood that complaint. It's true that titanium is softer than steel, but screws are actually made from titanium too. So in all the years I've been in the hobby, I've never seen a single example where a titanium frame completely stripped out and the entire slab needed to be replaced. I've just never seen that happening. So, and I don't think it's going to happen unless you're intentionally forcing it, especially on this one right here. I mean, just look at how thick that lock side slab is. This entire thing is threaded. I think you're going to be just fine. One thing I do need to point out though is that the ends of the screws right here, those things are actually somewhat rounded and polished. So they're finished as well. They kind of match with like the end of the stop pin right here. It's a nice little touch, and it actually goes with the design a bit better than the blue right here. Like if I cover this up, it kind of feels like it would kind of match with it a bit better. Blue kind of seems out of place. At least that's my opinion. Okay, so next thing I'm going to touch on, that's going to be build quality. So the fitment of the bolster and the scale right here, it's honestly impressive. If everything had the same texture right here, I couldn't feel anything. I don't feel any corners from any of these transitions right here. So there are no gaps, and I'll even show you right now actually. 1 second. Like, you don't see any light passing through. You don't see any gaps in the material, especially not in this dimension. Especially with the backspacer too. So it's very well built this way. With the backspacer right here, the fit is a bit less impressive. Like if you run your fingers over here, you can kind of feel a small ledge on either side of that carbon fiber. It's not really a big deal. It's not perfect, not really something I'll really ding them for. Overall though, I do need to say the tolerances on this one and just the overall build quality in general, it feels top notch. If you take the lock rock out of the equation right here, this thing is impressively built. I've already mentioned earlier, but the blade here is dead center. It arrived a bit off center when I got it. I tightened it back up, no Loctite or anything like that. It stays there with no issues at all. It never loosened up on me. I flipped it a lot, always stayed in place. That is a definite sign of quality for me. And those tolerances right there too. There's no side-to-side play with this when this thing's locked. There's no side-to-side play when it's unlocked. I have no complaints about the build quality here. Well, besides the lock rock, but everything feels 100% solid in hand at least. I mean, I know the lock bar moves slightly, but I don't feel it. There's no movement from the clip either, and just a bit more about that clip. It's well placed, but I think it's poorly designed. It's in the same kind of orange peeled zirconium that the bolster is. Kind of see it right there? But just look at the profile this way. See how wide the part right here that makes contact with the titanium is? And notice where the lock bar relief cut is. And also notice how deep and abrupt that cut is. If I run my fingers right here, I'm going to be honest with you. It has that same unfinished, sharp 90-degree corner feeling that the blade does. This is how a good clip should be. Something like this, where there's a lot of space underneath, single point of contact, and this relief cut right here just doesn't get in the way. It's away from the relief cut, and it's rounded on the sides. With this one right here, it causes a lot of problems. It's hard to get in and out of pocket. The clip pushes the fabric into this relief cut right here, and the relief cut is so abrupt and sharp that it won't let go of the material. And you get this situation where everything just gets bunched up. You end up having to jam this thing into your pocket and you have to rip it out. It's often a two-handed affair and there's a lot of fiddling required. It's never easy with this one. It's not good for your pants and it's not good for your convenience. I honestly think this needs to be fixed. It's probably the worst design thing on this knife. Other than that though, I do feel like it's very well placed. It fills your grip in hand. It's noticeably less chamfered than the rest of the frame, but that's not a problem at all. It's not an ergonomic issue. Even when you're doing hard cutting, you don't feel it. Moving on though, another thing that sticks out to me is just how this blade goes with the frame in general. I mean, just take a look at this part right here when it's closed. I'll even bounce some light off of it right now. If this part of the blade right here was flush with the frame, either by taking the blade down or bringing the frame out, I think it would look much better. It also feel much better too. It's not a big deal, and I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but it's all coming back to the sharp edges on the blade. The other thing is, when the blade is out right here, you can see it sits noticeably lower than the frame right here. Both those things kind of feel like an oversight, and it keeps this design right here from flowing as well as I think it could. Is it a big deal? Functionally, no. Even visually, it's not terribly noticeable. But at this price point, I do like to think that yes, it does matter. I want to see this kind of detail. It feels poorly thought out. And I've mentioned price a few times right now, but I'm just going to go deep into it right now. Price is going to be a part that really gets me on this one. It's $1,100. I honestly don't know where that comes from. This one right here, this one on camera, this is a good knife. But remember, I went through 6 other knives to find it, and those range from alright to garbage. One was even in the same run as this one. The other thing is, I also don't see a crazy amount of work going into this one. It's well built. I'll give it that any day of the week. But I'm not seeing any high-end finish work. There's no exceptional attention to detail here. The edges on the blade, they also look like nothing special. Like this right here, it doesn't even look finished. So, he did a basic satin on the flats right here. A coarse satin on the grinds. That's done to get a certain look, I get that. And it works here, but my point is they're not really time-consuming finishes. Materials are mid-ranged. Just pure acid-wash titanium on this side. Slab-sided frame. Terrible clip. Lock rock. It has the style of an $1,100 knife, but just not the substance. Leu also doesn't have the consistency to justify charging that price. If I paid the full $1,100 for this knife in front of me, you know what? I could live with that. It's not a good deal by any means. I'll feel like I overpaid, but it's not completely unreasonable. It has its ups and downs, but it's overall decent. It's not exceptional. It's not amazing. It's decent. The problem is, if you go out and buy one, you might not get something like this. You might get one that's much worse. Even with this one right here, I have a number of issues about it. And this is Pohan Leu at his best. Like, let's just say we put those first 5 knives out of the equation right here. Even then, I'm going 50-50 on just the Negligence model alone. Especially with this level of inconsistency, I don't think he earns that price just yet. I will say, I have been seeing a series of improvements from the guy. He's definitely getting better, but he still has a ways to go. He needs to fix those design flaws, and he needs to nail down his consistency more than anything else. I do need to say though, this singular knife in front of me today, it's probably the closest he's ever gotten. This one, it's a great model. I hope he keeps it in the lineup, but it just needs a few tweaks. Get those done and then we can talk about 1100. Because, you know, the custom knife world, it's crazy. Like, some are $3,000 for a base model, some are $800 for a dress build. But for knives in that upper range though, you know you're paying for a name behind it. 100%. Because you don't want having Tom Mayo or Lee Williams or Mick Strider or Graham Barker or OHGTC or whatever written on your blade. You know what that means. It's a guarantee of quality. You see the time, the effort, and the thought that those makers put into their knives, and it makes them greater than the sum of their parts. I'm seeing some hints of that here. It's a killer design. He's a maker with a distinct style. It's good in hand. The fit of the bolster and the scale, it's honestly impressive. And he finally made a good flipper. But there are too many flaws here. I don't know if having Leu written on your blade is something you want to pay more for. At least not yet. I just hope that he continues to grow and he keeps fixing things as he grows. So I think I've said all I needed to, and that's all I got here. So take care, I'll see you on the next one.